I have spent 40 years of my life staring into the darkness of the human eye, trying to bring back the light. My world is measured in micrometers. I deal with structures so small that the human mind can barely comprehend them, yet so complex that our most advanced supercomputers cannot replicate them. I am a scientist. My specialty is the retina, that thin, delicate tissue at the back of your eye that turns the chaotic energy of the universe into the clear images you are seeing right now. For decades, I was celebrated as a pioneer in stem cell research. I published papers, I led clinical trials, and I was driven by a single, obsessive goal: to cure blindness. To take a broken eye and make it see again. I was a man of logic, of data, of tangible proof. If I couldn't measure it, if I couldn't put it under my microscope, it didn't exist. God, the soul, the afterlife? To me, these were fairy tales. Comforting stories for people who were afraid of the dark. I didn't need God. I had science. But the irony is, while I was busy restoring sight to others, I was completely, utterly blind myself. I could explain exactly how the eye captures light, but I refused to ask who built the camera. My name is Henry, and this is the story of how looking through a microscope led me to look up at the sky. To understand my journey, you have to understand what I saw every day. The human eye is not just an organ. It is an engineering masterpiece that defies explanation. Consider the retina. It is only 300 micrometers thick, thinner than a sheet of plastic wrap. Yet, within that tiny space there are 10 distinct microscopic layers, packed with over 120 million photoreceptor cells. 120 million. Each one of them is a biological machine of terrifying precision. I would sit in my lab late at night, watching the chemistry of vision unfold. It begins with a single particle of light, a photon, hitting a protein called rhodopsin. In a fraction of a nanosecond, the shape of the molecule changes, triggering a cascade of chemical reactions so fast and so precise that it makes fiber optic cables look primitive. This signal travels through the optic nerve at a rate of 10 million bits per second, straight to the brain, where it is instantly converted into the face of your child, the color of a sunset, or the words on a page. For years, I tried to force myself to believe the standard atheist narrative, that this was all a happy accident. That billions of years of random mutations, of trial and error, somehow assembled this perfect camera. But the more I learned, the harder it became to swallow that lie. You see, the eye possesses what we call irreducible complexity. If you remove just one part, if the retina is there but the optic nerve is missing, or if the lens is clear but the chemical transducent is absent, the whole system fails. It doesn't work a little bit, it doesn't work at all. For the eye to function, all these millions of parts have to be present and perfect at the exact same moment. I remember one specific night in the lab. I was working on a stem cell culture, trying to coax these blank cells into becoming retinal neurons. It is an incredibly difficult process. You have to control the temperature, the pH, the nutrients, the timing, everything has to be perfect. If I made a mistake of even 1 degree, the cells would die. I looked at my petri dish, and then I looked out the window at the stars. A thought struck me like a physical blow. I am using all my intelligence, all my technology, and 40 years of experience just to copy a tiny piece of what already exists. If it takes this much intelligence to copy the design, how much intelligence did it take to create the original? It felt like finding a fully functioning iPhone on the surface of Mars and saying, oh, the dust storms and the wind must have assembled this over time. It was mathematically impossible. I knew deep down that there was a design. But my pride was a wall. I was too arrogant to admit there was a designer. The turning point didn't come with a bang, it came with a whisper. It happened during a lunch break with a colleague of mine, a brilliant researcher who happened to be Muslim. We were discussing the development of the human embryo specifically, how cells differentiate. How does a single cell know to become a heart, or a liver, or an eye? It is one of the greatest mysteries of biology. He listened to me rant about the complexity of it all, and then he smiled calmly. He said, Henry, you are amazed by the script, but you ignore the writer. You know, your research is described in a book from 1,400 years ago. I laughed. I actually laughed in his face. Impossible, I said. We only discovered stem cells and the stages of embryology in the last century. We needed electron microscopes to see this. A man in the desert 1,400 years ago couldn't have known this. He didn't argue. He just sent me a translation of the Quran and said, read. Just read. Out of curiosity and perhaps a bit of arrogance, wanting to prove him wrong and find the scientific errors, I opened the book. I started reading. I expected myths. I expected legends. Instead, I found data. I read the verses in Surah Al-Mu'minun about the stages of the human creation. Then we made the sperm drop into a clinging clot, and we made the clot into a lump of flesh, and we made, from the lump, bones, and we covered the bones with flesh. I stopped. My hands started to shake. The Arabic terms used alaka, clinging substance, mujja, chewed substance, described exactly what the embryo looks like under a microscope at those specific weeks. It was anatomically correct. It was precise. But then I hit a verse that stopped me cold. It wasn't about embryos. It was a direct question to me. It was found in Surah Al-Balad. Have we not made for him 2 eyes? And a tongue and 2 lips? And pointed out to him the 2 distinct ways? Have we not made for him 2 eyes? I sat there in silence for a long time. It felt like the author of the book was in the room with me. It felt like he knew exactly what I had dedicated my life to. For 40 years, I had treated the eye as a biological accident. But here, the Creator was claiming it as his signature. He was challenging me. You study the lens, Henry. You study the cornea. You study the nerves. Did you make them? Or did I? I realized then that I had been studying the painting with a magnifying glass, admiring every brushstroke, but ignoring the painter standing right behind me. I went back to the lab the next day, but everything looked different. When I looked at a stem cell, I didn't just see biology anymore. I saw a command. A code written by a supreme intelligence. Science explains how things work, but it cannot explain why they exist. Science can tell you how the eye processes light frequencies. But it cannot explain why we find a sunset beautiful. It cannot explain why we cry when we see our newborn child. That is not biology. That is the soul. I realized that Islam wasn't asking me to abandon science. It was asking me to complete it. The Quran was the missing piece of my data. It was the unified theory I had been searching for all my life. In March 2024, at the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan, I made the most logical decision of my life. I drove to the nearest mosque. I was nervous. I was a man of status, a professor, a director. But as I walked through those doors, none of that mattered. I didn't leave my brain at the door. I brought it with me. Because true intelligence leads you to God, not away from Him. I watched the men praying. They stood in lines, shoulder to shoulder, rich and poor, doctor and janitor, all equal. And then they did something that terrified my ego. They fell to their knees and put their foreheads on the ground. I had never bowed to anyone in my life. I was a man who stood tall. But in that moment, I realized that I was small. Compared to the complexity of the universe, compared to the creator of the 120 million photoreceptors I studied, I was nothing. I knelt down. I put my forehead on the carpet. And for the first time in 60 years, I felt peace. Not the satisfaction of a published paper, but the peace of a child returning home. I whispered the Shahada, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. As I said those words, I felt a physical weight lift from my chest. It was as if a blindfold had been removed. I have spent my life helping the blind to see. I have performed countless surgeries. But on that day, I was the one who was cured. I realized that the greatest blindness is not the inability to see the world. It is the inability to see the truth behind the world. Science is the study of the creation, but Islam is the connection to the Creator. My name is Henry. I am still a scientist. I still look through microscopes. But now, when I see the complexity of a cell, I don't see an accident. I see a miracle. And after a lifetime of studying vision, I can finally say, I can see.